Thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to sit here, and usually the talks, I have a skeleton of what comes to my mind, and then what I feel happens with the talks, they actually come out from the people, from us all together, because you all come here bringing your whole life with you, because that's where it's happening. I don't live at Zen Center anymore since 2006. I live in Mill Valley, but I still work and teach some at Zen Center, so I'm still connected. And I was sent a whole list of what talks you had by you, Stephen, right? And so I see that some of you may have heard the talks before, and some of you might hear the talks afterwards. And the talk, I was given the title, which is unusual for me to have a title given to me. So that was a great experience, new experience. Usually they just say, give a talk, and then I come up with what I come up with. And the title is, I'm a beginner, so what's Buddhism got to do with my daily life? So first I would like to say Buddhism has everything to do with daily life. That's actually the focus, and the whole intent of Buddha's teaching was to help us live daily life in harmony with reality as it is, with how everything works, and also in harmony. That means also in harmony with ourselves and all the many aspects of that being through a whole lifetime, and in harmony with all beings around us. Humans, animals, plants, earth, sky, the lakes, everything. So Buddhism everything in Buddhism has to do with daily life. What does it have to do with your daily life is up to you. Buddha said, don't just believe anything. If something speaks to you, your task is to find out if it's true for you. So that was in some ways his instruction, that all just knowledge that's intellectual doesn't really do the trick. It has to be an experiential knowledge that you have experienced. So if you hear something, find out if it's true for you. And I would say that should be true not just for Buddhists, whatever Buddhists tell you, including me or anybody else, but what anybody tells you. Because that, in some ways, comes back to the beginner. I'm a beginner, and in some ways Buddhism proposes that we are beginners all the time. In terms of not relying just on past experience and saying, I know how that's going to be. There's an experiment they did with people. They told them to watch a ball game, and half of the people, and told them which group they should count the passes that group was doing. Right? So 50 people were checking the passes of one group, and 50 people were counting the passes of the other group that were playing against each other. So they watched that video, looking, doing everything, and a woman dressed up as a gorilla walked into the video, turned facing everybody, beat her chest, and then walked out of the video. So at the end of the experiment, they asked the people, what did you experience? And they told them how many passes they've counted, and then they said, and what about the gorilla? And they said, what gorilla? There's another experiment where they had commercial pilots in a simulator, flight simulator, and they had them do landings in towns, different towns, airports. And on the landing strip, where they were landing their commercial airplane on the simulator, was parked a commercial airplane right across their landing strip. 25% of the pilots landed their airplane on that commercial airplane. They didn't expect to see, they thought they knew what they were going to meet and didn't expect, so they just didn't see it. And this is how we walk through life all the time. We see what we expect to see, we see what we're conditioned to notice by either being alert to be afraid or wanting something, and we miss a lot of things that are actually happening. So beginner's mind is the mind that is innocent, that is curious. If you watch children, they are incredibly curious about anything. They try it out, they put it in their mouth, they spit it out, they crawl around, they try to climb up, everything. They hold something in their hands and just feel it, and they're just feeling like, what is that thing in my hand? Because before they have a name for it. So it's also free of the habits of the experts, or of when we're focused on something, we usually like counting the passes. We don't notice something else that's happening in the middle of it. It's also a willingness to be open to possibilities. So an example for a beginner's mind would be if every morning when you wake up, you could actually wonder, who's here today, this morning? Who is it that's waking up? Rather than immediately going to, this is my old grumpy me that doesn't like to get up and have a cup of tea or something, or have to go to work. So to really be curious, how is this being put together every morning? It's every morning slightly different, and then through the day too. So Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths, and some of you have heard there were 3 lectures about the Four Noble Truths, and I just summarized them quickly. Actually, before I do that, I want to say the book Dancing with Life you're reading, actually Philip Moffitt, it's a fabulous book, and he very much emphasizes that to understand Buddhism, you need to understand intellectually what is said. Then almost the most important thing is to experience what is said. And then you do know that you know. But if it's only an intellectual knowledge, it's not transformative. It does not change anything in your life. So the first noble truth is, where there is life, there is suffering. It's not life is suffering. It's where there is life, there is also suffering. And there are 2 kinds of suffering. One is just the suffering that comes with life, because where there is life, there is going to be sickness, old age, and death. Everything that comes into life, at some point it will stop living in the form it has come into life. It will transform and turn into something else, but that particular form will come to an end. That's what the love of my life and partner Marcia calls suffering number 1. The way it is. It's completely impersonal. It's neutral. It's not aimed at you if you get ill, or if you break your leg, or if your partner gets ill and dies. It's just what happens. And that creates pain, your leg hurts, or sorrow, or, living without your partner or friend or parents or siblings or children at some point maybe. So that is the suffering. But that's completely objective, you could say. Philip Moffitt calls it objective suffering. Then there is a cause to suffering. But before, there is a second kind of suffering, which Marsha calls suffering number 2, and that's the do-it-yourself suffering. That's the suffering we create for ourselves, and that is, why me? This is not fair. I already lost blah-de-blah, and now I'm losing my keys every day, or something. It's that response we have to the suffering that just occurs, not by any intention against us. And we all have versions of number 2 suffering. I'm sure you know which are your favorites. And we all do have favorites, which we just fall into. And we know the favorites of our friends. And our partners. So when we know those 2 things, it's already much easier. So I'm quoting again my friend. If you notice that you're in number 2 suffering, it's only because you forgot number 1. You forgot to remember, oh, this is what's happening, it's just the way it is. I lost my keys. That's it. It's no big deal. I just have to look for them. If you can actually come back to the number 2 the way it is, you usually know what needs to be done, and it's not such a big deal anymore. It becomes, even if it's a big thing, even if your friend is dying, for example, you know what you want to do. You maybe want to just be there. And you want to arrange your schedule that you can be there. Or you want to invite another friend to go with you so you feel supported while you're there. And then you can sit there and you can cry or you can laugh, which you all do when someone is dying. You cry and you laugh because all life is right there. But it's simple. But if you get why me and poor me and this is going to be terrible for me, it messes everything up, which we all know. And it immediately spreads around. Everybody has to suffer with you. From number 2 suffering, it's harder to be around somebody who suffers from number 2 than somebody who just suffers with number 1. It's watch it, it's a little bit fun, like you're laughing, because you can identify it yourself and you can see it's just extra. And that's what the Buddha talks about. The number 2 is the suffering Buddha says we can become free of. He doesn't say we don't care anymore if we lose people or get sick. He just says this additional extra suffering we create by our reactions to it, from that we can be liberated. So, and then he says, so there's a cause to suffering, and the cause to suffering is, of course, are 3 things. And the main thing is ignorance. He says, we don't see things as they really are, because our perceptions present them as stable. Like we come in and of course your friends know you. And they know you next day, and they know you the next day, and they know you the next day. And so they recognize you. So you seem kind of stable, right? Buddha says, or the reality is that all compounded phenomenon, that means everything that is put together from many causes and conditions, that's a compounded phenomenon. So all compounded phenomena are unstable, unreliable, and unworthy of confidence. That means they continuously change. But we, of course, expect our close people not to change. Beware of change. We don't like them to change. And we get upset if they do, or they get upset with us if we do. So, because our perceptions say, well, the chair is always a chair, and it will be here if I walk out the door, and it will be here when I come back. But who knows? We can walk out the door and never come back because we might get run over by a car, or the house might burn down, which does happen to people. It just doesn't happen so often, and so often the changes don't happen so visibly that we forget. So we relate to them already basically in the wrong way, in a non-appropriate way. And out of that ignorance come greed and hate. Because if we think things are stable, we either like them and want to keep them, or we want to get rid of them if we don't like them. So these three are part of what causes suffering in our life. Then he says, there is an end to suffering, which is to understand the number 2 and 1, and if you can stop number 2 and see number 1 and understand that everything is continuously changing, and that because it's continuously changing, we get older, we may not like so much what we look like because we're attached to what we looked like when we were 20 and what we could do when we were 20. But if we understand all that, then the suffering ends. That kind of number 2 suffering. And there is a path that leads to that suffering. And that's where he applies the understanding how everything works to everyday life. And that's back to how Buddhism is about everyday life. So also, in that understanding that everything is that we perceive, that has a form, comes from many, many causes and conditions that come together to create that form, bring that form into manifestation. That also is another way of saying everything is empty of inherent, independent existence. But we perceive things as independent. We perceive, I'm here and I'm different from you. I'm a woman, you're a man. That's one difference, for example. But we are both, that's not independent, inherent, continuous essence or existence. So if we are ignorant of how everything works and how it's changing and how it is impermanent and how it is intricately interconnected, we are completely connected. We breathe the same air in this room. What you breathe out, I breathe in. Or all of you breathe out, I breathe in, and vice versa. We the butterfly flapping its wing, and then way somewhere else on the earth there is a hurricane. We have the dust from China come over here. Dogen, who is the teacher of the Soto Zen school, in which this place and Zen center is based in, says, your practice affects the entire sky and the entire earth. Even if you don't notice, it is so. So whatever we do affects everything, the entire sky and the entire earth. The smallest little thing affects everybody because we're so interconnected. There was a cartoon in a boat in the ocean, and on one end of the boat was sinking, and they were kind of hauling out water in buckets, and on the other end that was high in the earth. So there were people in the lower end that was sinking that were peasants and kind of third world people, and on the other side were people in suits and hats, or rich people. And they said, well, we're so glad it's not happening at our corner of the world. And they didn't see that it was one boat. And that's how, it's easy to see in the big picture, but in some ways that's what we do every day. We are not conscious how our everyday mundane actions, like with what kind of energy do we enter a bus? How do we treat the person beside us mentally or physically, energetically, that's in line, or that cuts in front of us on the street with their car, or that kind of says something when we would rather not hear anything, or that smiles at us, or if we start thinking that it's always affecting everybody, whether we know it or not, whether it becomes visible or not too, is really what Buddhism is talking about. And that dualistic worldview, actually, because we feel separate and don't see the interconnection so easily, is how we have also this dual approach, and like things and dislike things. And if we're not conscious of that, they will just drive our behavior. So Buddha never talked about metaphysical questions. He just refused to talk about whether there was a higher consciousness or a God or something like that. He said his approach was completely practical. He said the example he gave is like if you get hit by a poisoned arrow, and the doctor comes and wants to take the arrow out, and you first want to know what kind of arrow, where did it come from, who made it, what is it, and what poison it is. Then by the time he's answered all those questions, you're dead. It's too late. And so he said those questions are distractions. And I think it also is like, because if you start really sitting still, and that's meditation is the application, or is one of the tools Buddha gave people to start opening up so they could begin to experience what he said or what he saw. When he sat under the Bodhi tree, he understood those Four Noble Truths. He saw them. He saw how people kept going round and round and round with the same suffering, which you could apply to lifetime after lifetime in terms of rebirth, but you can watch it in a much smaller circle, how you go round and round and round with your suffering number 2 and your friends. You know, here she goes again. Here he goes again. You know it immediately when it's kicked in. And it's kind of disheartening, and it's kind of paralyzing when you see your friends go round and round. Of course, you don't notice so clearly when you go round and round, but they do. And so we go round and round until we wake up. So Buddha also, he went and learned from these saints and wise people and these wise people and tried it out, and he wasn't satisfied. So he decided, I'll sit down under this tree and I'm not going to move till I understand how life works. And that's what we all have to do. We go to teachers and they tell us something and we try it out. But it's not enough. We go to the next teachers, we learn something, we practice it, and it helps us, and it's not enough. At some point, we have to sit down, and the answer can only come to us in our form and our way. Nobody can wake you up. But we all have the capacity to wake up. It's just part of being human being and of the interconnectedness of us. So the possibility, Pema Chodron says this lovely, she says, in every situation of your particular life, in every daily situation of your particular life, all the ingredients are always there to be fully alive, fully awake, and fully human. There's never one ingredient missing. Possibility is always there, moment by moment. If you miss 10,000 moments, it's still there the next moment. So that is very heartening, I think, to just know that. And no one can do it. Kodosawaki Roshi, the famous grumpy Roshi, said, you can't even fart for another being. That's how he said it. You can't do it for somebody else. We all have our own individual, completely interconnected life. It's almost a paradox. It's completely individual and totally interconnected at the same time. So he offered meditation as a practice. And meditation, you could say, on one level came from the yogic tradition. So they, of course, in where Buddha came from, they sat around on the floor. They didn't have chairs, they didn't do this. So, and there was a whole yogic tradition. So there is this yogic position with crossed legs. You can watch it, look at it afterwards on the altar. There are several figures sitting there like that, pretzeled. But it was also a position that kind of, with a mudra, that kind of balances the energy from left to right and upright and connects you to the universal energies. It doesn't matter, you don't have to be able to sit that way to wake up. But there's something about being as upright as possible, or if you lie down, to lie in a way that you stay awake. And it's, on some ways you could say, it's letting your body help you to be still, to be in the present moment. I can't remember how many percentage of the time, but it's 99% of the time or even more. We are in our head, either in the past or in the future. But if you actually think about it, your life happens only where your body is, moment by moment. It doesn't happen in the past and it doesn't happen in the future. The past is a memory, the future is a fantasy, the present is called the present because it's the gift of life. it's also a present in that way as a gift. So it's, can we be here? And can we be open to the fullness of the here as a physical sensation, all the senses, hearing, smelling, tasting, touch, temperature, kinesthetic, mentally, emotionally, with what presents itself without moving, without being moved by it, or without grabbing it, or without pushing it away. So, which is, can we cultivate an open mind? It helps us cultivate the capacity to stand intensity. When we're angry, we would like to scream at somebody or punch somebody. That's a discharge of energy, because it's too much. When we're sad, we want to collapse into depression, which is also a kind of diffusing intensity. It trains us to stand the immensity of life, which is so incredible that it's inconceivable. It blows your mind. It blows the mind that looks at everything and makes little boxes of concepts and says, this is this and this is this. It's beyond that. Life is way beyond what we think about it. But because we are alive and we are an expression of life, we can actually realize what life is, which is different than knowing it as concept. So sitting still is what the Buddha kind of passed on, and what in almost all Buddhist tradition there is a place where there's seated meditation, or it can be lying down meditation or standing up meditation, but still, being still. And you know, Thoreau said in one of the, I'll be in a minute, in one of his things about writings in Walden, he says, if you sit at the clearing still and long enough, all the animals of the wood will come and present themselves to you. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, for me, that's such a wonderful metaphor for meditation. If we learn to sit still, all of life, of this life and of life all over the place, will present itself. You don't have to go after it. You don't have to stalk it. You don't have to hold on to it. You don't have to be afraid of it. It's more like it, and it cultivates this mind that is just curious. What is this? And not, oh, I know this. So I would like to open this up for questions.